Sup shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reviews where today we're going to be checking out some tracks from an act named Greg Barnett. The first one of these titled Crossroads, and if we switch over to here, we have these tracks on YouTube. We've got a bit of information about it. Well, no new music for a while. This is a cover suggested by Martin. Unfortunately, he has the guitar chops to make it work well. Crossroad Blues is a blues song written and recorded by Black American blues legend Robert Johnson in 1936. Oh, the great modern reinterpretation was created by UK... Cream on a second album Wheels of Fire. Co-produced, mixed and mastered by Martin Hale. Performers were Martin Hale and Greg Barnett. Awesome! By the way, this music that we're going to be listening to is available. It's on all streaming platforms. So without further ado, we're going to listen through each of these tracks, including Crossroads from start to finish. And we're going to hear what we think. Let's go! Nice balancing of the various ingredients in the mix.
Went down to the crossroad, fell down on my knees.
I was going to talk about the fact that the lead guitar was maybe a little bit too present in the mix in that previous part, but the vocals are charming enough to have made me forgotten that.
I went down to the crossroad, fell down on my knees.
The rest of the mix sounds really stellar.
Asked the Lord above for mercy, save me if you please. I went down to the crossroad, tried to flag a ride. I went down to the crossroad, tried to flag a ride. Nobody seemed to know me, everybody passed me by.
I think the phrasing of the lead is stylistically appropriate. It's just a little bit too loud for the rest of the mix. Add a tambourine we've got in the background there. Nice substitute for the hi-hat there.
Well, I'm going down to Rosedale, take my ride up by my side. Yeah, I'm going down to Rosedale, take my ride up by my side. We can still barrel house, baby, down by the riverside.
Nice mixture going between the piano lead to the organ solo here on opposite sides of the stereo field. Wasn't expecting it, but it works. Like, not tonally, what I mean is that I wasn't expecting it to go from various sides of the stereo field, like going from left to right like that. Usually the solo parts are in the center of the stereo field bit here, but this works nicely. I'm assuming this is probably going to be the conclusion coming up. That was a nice note to end on. There we go. The Great Modern Reinterpretation. Excellent. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on with Crossroads. I think that the music video is dope. I want to talk about the track though before we continue. I think that this, barring the comments that I made about the lead guitar being a bit too present in the mix in regards to the leveling of it, I think a lot of this track was really well done and positive. I think the vocal style made sense with the telling of someone at a crossroads, whether figurative or literally, in a position where they're isolated, alone, and danger stricken down by it. They just can't really cope with the situation now, warning people not to get caught in those crossroads again. The vocal performance did communicate that fairly authentically, and I think that the melodies that we had there, as well as a bit of vocal fry that we had included in that, was positive too. The guitar lines and the bass and the drums, keys and organ there reflected both the needs of the genre well as they amalgamated nicely tonally, texturally. The 12-bar blues regimen we had there with an exploration of pentatonics, major and minor scales, etc., blues scales was good and made sense there. It's been a long time since I listened to the Cream cover. To be honest, I'm not a massive fan of Eric Clapton because of the behavior he's exhibited over the years, so I've basically never really felt inclined to get involved with his music, and I struggle with the concept of separating the artist from the music. Well, and if you disagree with that, we can agree to disagree, but I still can appreciate the quality of the band as well as the quality of the original there, and I think that it did capture the essence of the original. 936 version was also modernizing it, and aside from a few kind of complaints there, I think that the phrasing of it with the solo sections between the vocals was done well, and it was tight instrumentally, and yeah, fairly positive for a first step. So for track number 2, we've got On an Island, a musical project instigated by Martin Hale, my local collaborator and friend since Prescient in 2015. Because I have actually reviewed a fair bit of Greg Barnett's music. If you like his music, feel free to go check out the other reviews of his on my channel. On the Island, original track by David Gilmour from the album of the same name. So that's cool. Be good to listen to some David Gilmour. Let's do it. On an Island.
Remember that night, white steps in the moonlight. They walked here too, through empty playgrounds. This goes down.
Beautiful effects on the vocals and
Children again on rusty swings, getting higher. sharing a dream on an island felt right.
What are those upper octave or higher parts? Are they a different singer? Are they a different singer? Is there more than one vocalist approaching those? Because if so, that's very effective. Very charming as well with the other components within the arrangement. It's just the vocals are the focal point there.
Lay side by side, neath the moon and the tide, tapping the stars for a while. Let the night surround you. We're halfway to the stars.
Phenomenal amount of dynamic range too.
Ebb and flow, let it go. Feel the warmth beside you.
Yeah, the guitars are much better leveled here. I love the grittiness of the fuzziness of that tone lead there. It's actually kind of If you're wondering why I'm not saying much, I just think it simply is better for the guitar to speak for itself. It's very kind of rude to talk over a guitar solo. It's rude to talk over a vocal part, though, to be fair as well. But it's also the thing with these reviews. You never really know when to step in. And when you've got a cover of a very well-known track that's very well composed by the original musician and then well performed by the person covering it, it's like you just run into a situation where there's no spots to kind of peek over. But I just want to make a comment before we continue that it's very rare that you can get away with this level of heft with a solo passage nowadays with instrumental backings, with a lot of the focus and the majority of the genres being on the vocals to keep the listener engaged. I just have to kind of appreciate how much music has changed since this track came out. Oh, beautiful. And that sub-layering of that organ is adorable, dude.
Remember that night, the warmth and the laughter. Candles burned, though the church was deserted. At dawn we went down through empty streets to the harbor. Dreamers may leave, but they're here ever after.
So when we talk about dreamers hereafter, are we discussing this is an island within a person's head? That is a place you're imagining to kind of escape from reality or something like that? That is only a place that exists if you allow it to, kind of internally? Nice overdub and call and response there, I like that.
Let the night surround you. We're halfway to the stars. Ebb and flow, let it go. Feel the warmth beside you.
It's very soothing though, this track. The tone of it, not just the words and the lyrics, but also the way the guitar sings for you, the rest of the instruments, putting a gentle floor below it. It's almost like the storytelling, the vocals are secondary to the ambience that it provides, the environment it creates. Classy fade out though, I do appreciate that. Stunning. Really positive. I had a really good time with that track. I'm going to need a few more listens to that track to really kind of get a good gauge of what it's about, because I think there's a lot of nuance to it. But if we go beyond what the track is about, I think that is very faithful to the way that the original was played. That style of vocals from like the Pink Floyd era, kind of David Gilmour kind of stuff. The melodies were captured nicely, solid vocal technique. The guitar was the other focal point beyond the singing, and I think that it pulled it off incredibly well. The leveling of the lead guitar in this mix was a lot better than in the first one. Everything else was behaving itself really beautifully in the studio production, and I think that it just sounded like a classic from an earlier time. It didn't sound like it was recorded in 2006. It had a wistful kind of tone to it that made me feel nostalgic for music like decades earlier than that. And I think that's kind of beautiful, as it maybe invokes the inspirations and the history of David Gilmour as a musician. I think ultimately it's a very satisfying, soothing listen with beautiful guitar, and the bass, the drums, and the organ in the background are there simply to fill the stereo field and the frequency spectrum and offer. I mean, there are some interesting drum fills, to be fair, but they were never meant to sort of take too much away from anything else going on. They were there to be a little bit unpredictable, to make it not too sort of rhythmically monotonous, but it was meant to be a calm sit and hear it kind of thing. And I think that we nailed it. And now for track 3, we got Where Is Your Smiling Face? It's a cover remix enhancement of the song Nackte Street, which was originally written, arranged, and produced by Stefan Kaesler and sung by his daughter Sophie Kaesler. Released in December 2019, it was amazingly recorded and produced using GarageBand on an iPad. I loved it on first hearing, and we got links to that as well, which is awesome. It's great. It's fantastic when we provide links to the songs that we're covering so that other people can hear the inspirations. But yeah, Where Is Your Smiling Face?
Du bist nicht da, an meiner Seite, dein Sitz bleibt leer und macht der freie Platz.
Wonderful synth pads, vocals, and the bells as well. Oh. Minor triads?
I stand here wondering, why did I go so far down a winding dead-end street to lose my love, my star? And so again my plan
Shallows?
is gone. There's no easy way to say. Teary eyes that cloud the sun, the laughter fades away. What on earth is wrong with me, wrong with the world. Does no one see? You're not here. You're not here where you should be. There's just an empty space. Where is your smiling face? Silence surrounds me, just a foggy memory of what we were all about. When this emptiness inside of me is aching in its misery, I dream that I see your face again.
Oh, there's a brass. There's a brass. There's strings, there's brass, there's all sorts of fun elements here. I suppose this is potentially a bit more sort of loyal to the original, but still, it's fascinating to hear it for the first time. Great major shift. Wasn't expecting it to end on a minor tone though.
Du bist nicht da, an meiner Seite. Dein Sitz bleibt leer und macht der Freiheit Platz. Und diese Stimme in mir drin lässt mich über mich nachdenken, den Dingen, die ich längst verdrängt habe. Dieses Vakuum in mir verlangt frische Luft zum Atmen. Steh auf, lass alles rein und schreib's heraus.
It's nice to have the combination of the German and the English to get the beauties of both languages in there. It helps people like me understand what's going on, but it's also respectful to the original, you know?
I still stand here wondering, will I be going far? A new dream, a new awakening, a fresh sunbeam, another star. What on earth is wrong with me, wrong with the world? Does no one see? You're not here. You're not here where you should be. There's just an empty space. Where is your smiling face? Silence surrounds me, just a foggy memory of what we were all about. This emptiness inside of me, aching in its misery, I lift my face and shout and let it all out.
Great message. It's okay to feel stuff, you know?
I can feel myself growing bolder. The dawn's already here to chase away my fears. I'll fly again before I get too much older. You're not here. You're not here where you should be. There's just an empty space. Where is your smiling face?
All right. Good, good, good. I mean, not good. Clearly the message isn't good, but you know what I mean? I think the song is well written and performed. Interesting ominous synth pad with the bells as well. Where is your smiling face? Featuring Sophie Casely. Yeah, I was wondering if they managed to get her involved. That's awesome. Well done. I think this track was about someone who is simply not really coping with the fact that they don't have their special person, there's someone they love and adore, and the world around them is just either falling apart or it just seems very kind of decrepit and not nearly as bright and brilliant as it used to be. I think there's like an awareness that potentially things could improve, you know, maybe things will get better in the next chapter of our lives. But it's just basically coming to terms with the fact that we don't have that person's smiling face anymore, and it sucks, and we have feelings and we just got to let them out as we did at the end. I want to sort of quickly comment on a couple of things. One, I think that it was fantastic to have Sophie in here, to hear the German part done really, really well. But also the German at the beginning from, I think, Greg was sorted. I think having it in English again allowed me to understand it, which I appreciate, because otherwise, even though the song was fantastic and I appreciated the vocal melodies, harmonies, all the rest of the instruments in the mix, etc., you just feel like you're missing something important, right? I think that outside of the vocal performance and the story, the track was well composed. We had several different sections with different atmospheres, chord progressions, that maybe even slightly different tempos there. We had similar instruments, but they weren't the same, slightly different makeups. I love that major turn that we had after that initial sort of verse part. We were almost happy to remember that person's smiling face. I like that we had the image of the baby because it was like, oh yeah, that person made us happy, etc. Returning to remember that person. Then after that, we realize they're not here anymore, so we go back into that chorus and we kind of loop between those. It's part of the grieving process, you know. I think in general, the level of studio production was good. The motif there sounded sad. There was a happiness at the turn, but ultimately, especially with the bells tolling for thee, it was like a time thing. It was almost like we just had to sort of accept what was happening. And even if we had all those feelings around us, there was life outside of our own existences, and that was maybe what was starting to call us at the end. Fantastic track, though. Very well done. So now we've got Running from Red. I released this audio track as a single in October 22, and now 4 months later I decided to have a crack at a music video. As always, it's impossible to find enough quality, relevant imagery from my limited clear to published sources to tell the visual story I had been imagining, but after 50 plus videos I've learned to accept a make-do philosophy and work with whatever I can find. I hope the visuals are emotionally compelling for others without resorting to sensationalism. The audio track here is a result of lack of other music projects towards the end of 2022. The desire to revisit this particular song was fueled by the constant horror of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Yeah, so it's a talk about it, which is still going, by the way. It seems like it's been a very, very long time since the conflict began, but it's still going, and it's terrible. And I think that it's equally as important for people to make music about it now and release it as it is ever, so that people don't forget that it's still going on and that they still continue to care about it, because it's important to care about things like that, you know? Apathy is the worst enemy. Let's get into it. It's an 8-minute track, but that's okay. If it's good, it'll be fine. Extended remix. I wasn't expecting the synthy electronic stuff going with this, but it's a fun direction. Even though there's dramatic urgency to it.
Running from red. When you're running from red.
Nice work with the stereo field.
When you're running from red.
I mean, this is one of the most unusual, almost, how do I describe it, unexpected experiences I've had with the start of the track about a subject like this. A lot of the time it's very intense guitars and drums and keys and stuff like that. You don't necessarily have the vocal modulation and such like that. So I think this is actually a very creative way to approach it. It'll be interesting to see how we continue it though, especially as we continue to go back to those steel string arpeggios. Is this meant to sort of reflect like the 80s tone of the synths around that period with the pads and stuff, with like the Cold War fears and such?
This government has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Silhouettes in the trees, stealing food from the fields, lashes in the sky, running from red.
I can hear what we're trying to do here, and while the instrumental choices might be a little bit...
Tell me why.
While the instrumental choices might be a little bit unconventional, I can appreciate what we're trying to attempt here with it. I mean, like, there's a hell of a lot that's going on in the first 3 minutes for sure. That is a good thing.
Family is torn apart. There's terror in the air, running from red.
Poor kid.
We'll meet at Waterloo 20 years from now, when we laugh and cry together. We'll remember how.
A lot's changed in the time that I listened to Greg and reviewed Greg's last album. A lot has changed in the world. It is kind of wild how things are getting in regards to the world and its politics. You know, whatever side of the spectrum you're on, like, you got to admit, it's not the most awesome situation right now. There's a lot of tension. It's I think songs like these are more important than ever now, just as long as we have the freedom to be able to put them out.
We'll meet at Waterloo 20 years from now, when we laugh and cry together. We'll remember how. How we lost all that we had, but brother, you and I know.
The slickness with those hi-hat patterns then was dope, man. I like the fact we're continuing to develop as we go along. We're not just sitting on the same rhythm, the same perspective there. We're adjusting.
Gotta keep your head when you're running from red. Running from red.
Halftime for this. I'm gonna just say something candid here, not as a criticism or anything like that, but I've noticed the synth sounds and we appear to be having quite a lot of fun with synthesizers. Greg, if you're watching this, there is a company called Slate Digital, and if you're not familiar with them, Slate Digital, they have this monthly subscription thing, and I'm not sponsored by Slate Digital or anything like that. I just simply use their products, and they're quite good. They've got this synthesizer called Ana 2, and it's phenomenal. I think that if you're enjoying the process of using these sorts of synths, using a synthesizer like Ana 2 would be a lot of fun for you, just with whatever music you make in future, because there's so many different sounds, and I think you could really have a lot of joy of it. Even though this isn't meant to be a joyous experience with this track right now. It's been fun listening to all those different ideas with those instruments there. I mean, it's extravagant, really. And when I say extravagant, what I mean is I'm used to so many people having to put their tracks into like 2 to 4 minutes. For us to feel comfortable putting a song into a longer form factor like this is awesome. I think there is enough to keep us entertained here. It kind of reminds me of how the music industry is nowadays. Phenomenal Foley sound design there. I think this is one of the best songs I've heard that are in support of Ukraine. I almost feel a little bit cynical. With the way I see a lot of the stuff I was listening to around the time that the Ukraine war started. I feel as if there were some musicians who were releasing music purely to sort of make the most of the fact that it was a hot topic. And it almost seemed more like they were releasing it for commercial distribution and stuff like that. There were some that were putting it towards like the proceeds towards Ukraine and stuff like that. But it just feels kind of weird when you have other musicians who are like trying to put stuff out to get people to listen to it, like to make money off of it for their own personal gain. And this obviously isn't a case of it. This is an exceptionally authentic track. This is it's probably the most original take from a track on the subject I have heard, period. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out. I really appreciate the fact that with this track, Running from Red, we simply have a situation here where Greg and Martin Hale are making the most of music as a medium. Even though the subject matter was incredibly intense and horrific and depressing, it's still at the same time really wonderful to see the experimentation, the attention to detail that they put in with the instrumental composition there. I think that the minimalism with the way the story was told there, having the backing as the focal point there, having the themes front and center with lots of different lead layers and synths on various sides of the stereo field and Running from Red going left and right, back and forth, call and response was just really dope. All in all, I think this couldn't have been any longer than it was. I think that we got the hang of the theme at the end there very comfortably. And I think that having the plane fly over top with the machine gun fire was a very fitting and rather sobering way to finalize things. But all in all, it just proves that Greg Barnett, with Martin Howe as well, they're capable of doing a track of length or whatever they need to, and they'll still basically nail it. I think that it was a nice, raw, authentic performance, and I feel as if it was a great opportunity to hear some more digital aspects within this, and I think it was a nice contrast to some of the other singles where they've been more analog based, and that was good. And then we've got the final track for today, Hard to Say I'm Sorry. This is to be my first video to use AI-generated images, and these ended up comprising roughly half the running time, the other half being my usual modus operandi of stock video image. Turned out to be the second AI image music video to be uploaded. Agin Core was started later but finished earlier because the production side of Hard's audio track took longer than expected. Should also mention that this was the familiar song was written by Peter Cetera and David Foster. So last track for today. Gonna listen through it from start till finish. Hear what we think. Let's go. Interesting use of the metronome there with natural harmonics. Very soothing. Man, how many instruments do we have across these tracks?
Many years have passed before today. It's all my fault we're not together. So many things I did or did not say. So we were torn apart forever.
There's nothing that really beats having a singer with an acoustic guitar, steel strings. It's just a really great combo that never ages.
Where are you now? Time moves on so quickly. There's just one thing I need to say.
Have I listened to this before?
That I need you back right next to me, breathing soft and
Have I listened to this before?
Why can't you see that no matter where you've been, you need to be back here, back where you belong.
Are we doing something with our vocals?
Yes, I never really understood. You said you knew I never would. You know, I really thought I could.
What I like about Greg's stuff, and I know I'm interrupting a lot, but it's because there's a lot to talk about, okay? I'll try to simmer it down for the rest, but I like that we don't just go straight into the next section. We have a little break. We have the flurries of the strings and the woodwinds harmonizing with each other and everything. It's just a nice way of refreshing the palette, especially with a longer form track.
Everybody needs a little time away, I heard her say, from each other. Even lovers need a holiday, far away from each other. Hold me now. It's hard for me to say I'm sorry. I just want you to stay. After all that we've been through, I will make it up to you. I promise to.
It's just so charming to have these backing vocalists around the background with the nice reverb tails on them. Nice and refreshing there. Great development.
After all that's been said and done, you're just the part of me I can't let go. couldn't stand to be kept away just for the day from your body. Wouldn't wanna be swept away far away from the one that I love. Hold me now. It's hard for me to say I'm sorry. I just want you to know.
This is probably my favorite of the 5.
Hold me now. I really want to tell you I'm sorry. I could never let you go.
Freeform with the tempo.
All that we've been through, I will make it up to you. I promise to. And after all that's been said and done, you're just the part of me I can't let go. After all that we've been through, I will make it up to you. I promise to.
Great. I'm glad this came in here. It felt appropriate. And brass as well as strings. Yeah, this is by far my favorite. There's just something very special about this one. This feels like a classic. This one feels like a classic. Hard to Say I'm Sorry. Original song by Peter Cetera and David Foster. Additional words and music by Greg Barnett. Just real quickly before we get into the conclusion, I think part of the reason why this works so well is that the story was instantly accessible because you could easily understand what it was about. I think it's going to be relatable to a lot of people as well. So people are going to be able to sort of like, that feeling of missing someone. It's hard to say I'm sorry, you regret making the person feel that way. I think in addition to that, what we have is a situation where it was just so soothing to have the woodwinds for the guitar, to then have the ballad development of like the bass and drums coming later on with the brass and the string parts. It was so satisfying to have continuous movement forward there in regards to the intensity there, in regards to the complexity of the arrangement. We didn't get everything at the start. There were little hints of it as we went on, but we were kind of teased a little bit in the way where it eventually paid off. I think that the vocal performance from Greg Barnett was good. I'm wondering if there was something on his vocals, because some of those transitions between notes were very legato-ish, but it's nice. I think the notes chosen, especially with the backing harmonies as well, the way they arranged themselves in the stereo field and just in regards to coalescing with everything else was pleasurable. I think just at the end when everything came together in this massive sort of like fortissimo section, it was just so beautiful and wonderful to have all. It was almost like a happy situation where maybe we were pleased to have them in our lives, but at the same time, I don't know, was it celebrating the love we have for that person and realizing how much they meant to us? Is that it? Is that why things were sad at the start? Yeah, maybe. But let's talk more about that in the conclusion. And welcome to the conclusion of my review of these tracks from an act named Greg Barnett. These tracks titled Hard to Say I'm Sorry, Running from Red, Crossroads, Where Is Your Smiling Face, and On an Island in no particular order. I listened through each 5 of these tracks today and I gave my thoughts at the end of each, so I'm sort of going to talk more about my thoughts on these songs as a whole. We had a combination of covers here with originals such, those covers being tracks like On an Island, Where Is Your Smiling Face, Crossroads, and Hard to Say I'm Sorry. But we've also got the original, as I understand it, Running from Red. This demonstrates to me, basically, if you're looking to kind of get the good news early at the start of the conclusion, that I think that we're capable of doing both covers and originals very, very well. There is a bit more nuance to it though. I think that the stuff that we talked about in each of these songs was either related directly to the original or intensified upon with the Where Is Your Smiling Face part, where we actually had Sophie get involved as well, who was part of the original track. So that was really beautiful. Running from Red was fairly easy to understand simply because not only because of the description, but also because the imagery of like the Soviet stuff. And I get it. With the war in Ukraine, it makes a lot of sense. But I think that was done the way it was very authentic. It wasn't trying to sort of like capitalize on the interest in that when it was made. And I know that sounds incredibly cynical, but I've been doing these reviews for 3 years, and that's where I am with it. I think these tracks are well written and well performed. The vocals that we had were great. These tracks were sung well by Greg Barnett, and then other musicians were involved, such as Sophie and Where Is Your Smiling Face, and the backing musicians that were involved in tracks like Hard to Say I'm Sorry. We had good vocal technique, compelling melodies that either matched what was present in the original pieces, or in Running from Red, they followed the fundamentals of music theory and composition, coexisted really well within the existing key shapes and scales, and ultimately were very satisfying to listen to. They sounded very emotionally appropriate for the subject matter that we were discussing there, very stylistically close to the originals in regards to songs like On an Island, where I could kind of imagine directly or relate the original to the cover. And in the sense that, like, I think that the effects that we had on the vocals there, not only the style but also the effect that they worked too, which was really nice. And I think that what I appreciate most about the vocals is that we didn't try to make the covers too much into our own thing. I think we managed to find a sweet spot where Greg sang in a way that would remind people of the original and pay tribute to it, but also sang within his strengths, his vocal range, and in a way that was his. And you could hear his voice and you could analyze and identify it, and you could carry that across any of these singles and be very satisfied with it. I don't think there were any faults with the vocals. They told the stories well, and the stories, and whether they were the covers or Running from Red, were told well and were interesting and made sense. So there was a nice connection between the elements there. These songs were long. Usually the sweet spot with the tracks that I review, they're like 2 to 4 minutes. These tracks were between 5 and 8. And if I'm honest, that isn't always a good thing. The problem with having longer tracks is often that people will get to a point where they either repeat things too many times and they become sort of boring or uninteresting, or they become redundant, as in it's not helping the song at all to continue. There's diminishing returns. Or that it's just simply too long for someone to get invested in, even if the song is really fascinating the whole way through, because spending 8 minutes listening to a track for a lot of people nowadays, especially with the shortened attention spans due to social media and other things, it's just not really doable. So it's a brave move to release tracks in their longer form factor, with the understanding that there's nothing wrong with it and that there's also no need to make music for other people. But I think that the reason I don't discard the concept of making it interesting for the listener is simply because everything else is just so tight. Greg clearly cares about his music, and it's just simply that the nature of the way music is presented, written, performed, and recorded nowadays is very different to what it was maybe when these tracks like Crossroads or On Island came out, even in the mid-2000s. It's just 2 to 4 minutes is a sweet spot, and a lot of tracks are coming out maybe even less than that in certain genres. But that's okay, because what Greg did was he recorded and performed these tracks incredibly well. But, I was happy with the vast majority of it. I think there was just 1 or 2 things with the post-production there. But if I go over the structure of these tracks, typically they either followed the concepts of the originals with like verse and chorus sections there and lavish instrumental parts. There were, especially with tracks like Crossroads and On an Island, guitar solos for days. We also had keyboard and organ parts there, and accents from like the woodwinds and the strings and brass and lots of allied instruments, including the bass and drums, which had their moments as well. But it was not a no-frills experience. There was a lot of pleasant, really invigorating stuff to appreciate and enjoy. If I talk about a few of my favorite instruments within this album as a whole, 'cause it's just so many, and I feel like I'd be here for like 2 hours talking about it otherwise. I think if we talk about like, let's just say five instruments that I appreciated throughout these tracks. I think the guitar playing was exceptional. I loved the lead guitar playing when it wasn't too loud in a mix, such as in Crossroads, but that's just, again, that's a small thing I'm not going to nitpick. It's simply was incredibly well considered and appropriate for both the mood of the pieces that we were soloing over. They sounded like they fit, if they weren't the original solos, they fit the overall vibe and aesthetic of the covers incredibly well. And I think that we knew also when not to have them, when it was some better in tracks like Running from Red. We didn't have the guitars as a focal point the entire time. Sometimes we allowed the synths to be the center, or, you know, like other instruments there. We had guitar throughout a lot of these tracks. I think that's one of Greg's main instruments, but we never kind of fell away from that to a point where it was a detriment. We were technically competent on the instrument, and it was always a pleasure to hear what unpredictable chord patterns or progressions we had next, because we not only understood how to put different chords together, but also how to use parallel majors and minors, how to maybe do key changes, etc., how to switch between things. I think that does come from having inspirations of music from like the 20th century, because a lot of music nowadays is a lot more safe compositionally than it used to be back then. There's less harmonic complexity to it or diversity to it, but simply because there can be a risk if things sound a bit too strange with a lot of modern music, commercial music. We didn't have that issue here. It was really creative and well done. The drums were fantastic. I liked both the acoustic drums that we had in the majority of the tracks as well as the stuff that we did from Running from Red. I'll be honest, I wasn't sure if I was going to like the stuff from Running from Red very much, simply because when we came into it, I was like, okay, we have the guitars with the bass with these doof drums. How are we going to make this work? But then as soon as I clicked, there were references to like the 80s and a lot of the synthy electronic stuff from back then. It made a lot of sense, and tonally it was great. There's a wide variety going on with like the different, you know, drum, kick, bass parts, the hi-hats, etc. It was wonderful to behold there. We didn't just sit with one groove. We experimented with various parts. There were interesting, intriguing drum fills putting us between sections. And again, just like with the guitar, when you went to pull away and allow space for other elements there was restraint and consideration with the arrangement, and it was appreciated. I think the key parts and tracks like Crossroads were great. I think that the solo sections going between the left and right side there, like they're articulated wonderfully. Great phrasings there with the various sort of like broken chords, the right hand solo parts messing around with like the blues scales and pentatonics and all those kind of scales there. It was a mature performance, and we understood the instrument well, and we showed that without overplaying. And it's very difficult to have that amount of technicality to a solo without overplaying, but they just found room for it by maybe taking away other elements or making the backing a little bit less kind of like complex, so that there was a nice balance with the equilibrium. I think the woodwinds that we had in Hard to Say I'm Sorry were gorgeous with the harmonies there. The harmonies there were beautiful, and they were wonderfully soft and smooth over top of what was going on with the guitar parts and everything else. They had a presence there where they didn't interfere with other sections, and it was just nice to have more classical elements there in a way that was played respectfully within the genre. And when coupled with the strings and the brass at the end, it was just incredibly charming. They created this wonderful tapestry there where they all weaved together and formed this wonderful, again, crescendo, as I mentioned before, that was satisfying and just was a natural conclusion to the ballad. And finally, the synthesizers that we had from Running from Red were elegant and spicy and zazzy at the same time. They were full of energy and pep, and they just so many different sounds, and we were clearly having a lot of fun with choosing the different kind of edgy tones we wanted, and they did speak of danger, and it was incredible. It was a real riot, and I want to hear more synthy stuff from Greg. I hope that he continues to experiment with those tones. I would love for him to do that. It can be a real shame to be too safe with the acoustic analog stuff. I still know musicians who kind of stay away from that stuff, but there's just this entire other world of it that you can explore if you're brave enough, and I hope he is. And I just don't think the track would have been the same otherwise. In retrospect, I think that Running from Red would have just been too sort of like tonally, emotionally intense and dire without those synth leads and pads and stuff. So I'm glad we had it. It was good. The themes in general were more relevant towards what the track was that we were doing. There wasn't an overall theme from these really, and if there was, we kind of described them in the description of the videos of the YouTube I mentioned. But what I will say is I just think this is Greg trying new things, experimenting and exploring different concepts that he wanted to talk about, and I don't think there were any moments where I was alienated from the description of the YouTube video by the music, by the lyrics, etc. It was very well connected, and we clearly have that down pat. And if we just finish it off with the studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering, I think here we had a set of tracks which were really well done. There were a couple of things I pointed out, like a leveling issue with like the guitar lead in like Crossroads, where I think it was a bit too present, and that could have potentially been fixed by double checking them at the mix in mono before we bounced it. There was also the fact that maybe on an island the vocals could have been like a little bit too loud there, and we could have potentially turned them down 0.5 dp, but everything else was damn near flawless. And I think that there was a lot of dynamic range to the recording in general. It was nice and huge with the massive differences between the quiet and loud parts. There were nice fade outs as well, which were kind of dope and gave me that nostalgic vibe of how tracks used to be done, where they used to do that. The drums, bass, guitars, synths, keys, brass, woodwinds, all that stuff found a place in the frequency spectrum and the stereo field and sat there lovingly, and not just with the presence and filtering EQ of the vocals, with the extra effects chains and tracks like On an Island. We also had like interesting placements of the vocal parts, like in Running from Red, where they came from left to the right, and that happened with other instruments as well, like in Crossroads we had the keys on the piano on the left and then the organ on the right. Had sub-layering as well, like with the organ and On an Island, where it was just there for you to kind of really kind of peek at if you paid close enough attention, and I enjoy that depth there, in regards to the leveling. It was nice to know that pumping, so the bus compression was handled well, and I think all in all it's just really positive. So well done to Greg. Thank you very much for watching my review of Greg Barnett's various tracks, and hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please do go show him some love via his various social medias and YouTube page. Stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists at this point in time, as they have to help more than ever with all these crazy stuff going on in the world. And I'll catch you in the next review. Spider hands out.